now. Right, well, hopefully people out there can see us and hear us. If you can post a comment in the comments, just so we know whether you can hear me and whether you can hear Chris. Now, the problem that we were having is that I could sometimes hear Chris and sometimes not hear Chris. And then there were many times when he couldn't hear me at all. Now, the problem that we have at this moment in time is I can see and I can hear Chris very, very clearly, but Chris can see me but he can just about hear me. So he might have to ask me to repeat things again, or I will write a question down or something like that. So if you can just let us know if anyone is still out there, if you can, if you can see and hear us, just before we, carry on too much, I'll just post a question. Can you all see us and hear us? Because no one has said anything at all. And I was hoping someone might have said something by now. I can see and hear you, Tony. Good. And Chris, can you talk and can you hear and see Chris?
Well, yeah. Hello, Tony and everybody. And I don't know what the technical difficulties are, but apologies. It's the wonders of technology.
Okay, so you can see and hear us both. Okay, so like I said, Chris can see me, but he can, yes, I can see and hear you both. Okay, good. All right. Well, before we start talking about Dartmoor or wild camping, let's just chat just for a few minutes about things generally, if we can. Just let a few people come in, and then we will, and then we can get on to the interesting things. So tell me a little bit about what you've been doing recently, Chris, because you've been snowed in. So I know you've had, from what I've seen on your post, you've had to go skiing to the supermarket. So what is life like up in Scotland when you are snowed in?
Well, we've had 2 periods of heavy snow this winter. The first one, which started before Christmas, lasted about 3 weeks. We don't usually get snow at this level in December. That then thawed for a week or 10 days, and then we got an even heavier dump of snow, which only thawed last week. And because we're half a mile up a farm stroke forestry track, fairly steep, from the road, when it gets heavily snowed or iced, it's impassable unless you've got a tractor or something. So the easiest thing is leave the car at the bottom of the track and pull groceries and anything else needed up the track in the sledge.
Right.
But it's also meant that I've been able to go out skiing from home. I mean, literally from the front door, because the snow has been so deep. But it's been an odd winter, because when the first lot of snow started to thaw and it warmed up, it was suddenly ridiculously warm. We had temperatures here of 11 degrees, which is really hot for January. And of course, October and November were really warm as well, with no frosts. So we've had 2 periods where it's been really, really cold and snowy. And before that, and in between those, periods where it's been the opposite, where it's been warmer than usual. So who knows what's going to come next. At the moment, at this level, there's no snow.
Right,
and
so it's all thawed now.
Down here, yes. There's still plenty of snow in the mountains. But at this level, and this level is 300 meters, the snow is gone.
Right, okay. So you're 300 meters, are you? That's quite low, really, isn't it? You're 300 meters, are you?
Pardon?
Are you at 300 meters? Are you at 300 meters?
No, I'm sorry, Tony. I've lost you.
Okay. Can you hear anything?
I heard that. Yes.
Okay. So you are at 300 meters.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's try and go on to Dartmoor while we can, and hope, because like I said, it's difficult for you to hear me, but I can hear you clearly. I've written down some questions. Where did I? So because we can hear you.
Good.
So talking about Dartmoor, can you tell us, because I don't really know, and I'm sure other people don't know that might join us, can you tell us how or why Dartmoor allows wild camping and other national parks don't? What happened?
Well, I must admit, I didn't know this until I looked it up in relation to the latest changes. But there was a Dartmoor Commons Act in 1985, which gave a right of access to all the common land, so-called, which is a large area of Dartmoor. So that's where it came from.
Right. Okay.
No, as far as I know, nowhere else in England has a similar act, which is why Dartmoor was unique and is still unique in terms of the access for, it seems, almost anything except wild camping.
Right. Okay. Okay. So could other national parks do the same thing if they wanted to?
Well, the national park manages the commons, so they were the ones who ran the access following the Act of 1985, and the park had assumed, and obviously, as we know, put on the website and told everybody that the access that the Act and the park's assumption was that wild camping came under outdoor recreation, and therefore it was allowed in those areas along with, walking, climbing, etc. Of course, the judgment came in, and the judge says that wild camping was not recreation and therefore wasn't allowed. According to the judge, wild camping is a facility for recreation, but it's not recreation itself. Therefore, you can't do it without permission of the landowner.
Right. Okay. And they're now going to try and appeal that. Is that something that they will definitely do, or is that just something that they've put into process because they have to, and then they could decide?
Well, as I understand it, yeah, the park has applied to be allowed to appeal the decision. And assuming they can appeal it, they then have to put a case together as to why the judgment was wrong. I imagine this could take quite some time, but I've no real idea. But first of all, it has to be accepted that they can appeal. If they get permission to appeal, then they've got to start putting it all together to make a case. And obviously, they've got to try and argue it differently than they did for the original judgment. Otherwise, it'll just be said, well, you've said all that already, and that's been rejected.
Right. Okay.
But I'd have thought there was a strong case for them saying wild camping is recreation. That wild camping comes under the heading of outdoor recreation. and it's not just a facility for doing so. Because as we know, plenty of people, including both of us, go wild camping for the sake of the wild camping.
Yeah.
We don't go wild camping purely because it allows us to do something else. You know, it is an end in itself.
Yes, that's right.
So it is outdoor recreation.
Yes. Because obviously some people, I think, I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but part of the thing that was to do with Dartmoor was that they were saying that if you're doing a long walk, you might need to stop and get some rest and that type of thing. And that's how partly maybe they were thinking about it. But as you say, what we would often do, and other people, is just go for a 3-4 kilometer walk and just camp because we want to chill out and relax.
Yeah, well, yes. I mean,
so is there a difference?
I've always felt that a long distance walk involves two things, the walking and the camping, and they're both integral to it. So, I mean, I don't really separate the two.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because as you say, we both do it to enjoy the process of that. Let me just see what I've written down here. Will they actually appeal with just that? It's just a... Oh, hang on. Where did Chris go? Hang on a minute, everybody. Oh dear. Hang on a minute. We've lost Chris. Hang on. We're having wonderful fun and games. I'll see if I can email Chris back. I think because he lives in the back of Beyond, I suspect his signal sometimes is... Oh, I think he's back again. Hang on, let me come out of this a minute then. Hang on. I can hang on.
Various questions appearing in the comments.
Oh, you were there all the time, so that's okay.
And I was trying to work out how to reply to them because there doesn't seem to be an option for me to post in the comments.
Right, so okay. Can you not post?
I apologize to people who are asking me questions, but at the moment, I can't answer them.
Okay, can you see the questions?
Oh, I can see there's a whole list of comments.
Okay.
I mean, there's so many comments now from the beginning that I have to scroll down to see them all.
Okay.
You know,
right.
I mean, Ooten Boots has asked me, where are you based? Aviemore. Well, Granton-on-Spey, so not far away. And Tweedy Outdoors has asked about what's special about hiking in the UK, which you can't find anywhere else, saying that I've spent a lot of time hiking in the US. I think there's a number of things, but one of the things in the UK, and specifically in Scotland, is the freedom of access and freedom to wild camp. You know, you don't need permits. You don't need to know which areas you have access to in the way that you do in lots of places. But also in the UK, it's the huge variety in a very small space. You know, some of the walks I've done in the USA, which are spectacular, I love them, but there are lots of places where you can walk for 50 miles, not much really changes. You know, if you didn't know, you could think you were still where you were 50 miles before, because the scenery, the landscape is so vast that at walking speed, it only changes slowly. Now, obviously, this is not so in the UK. You know, anywhere in the UK, if you walk 50 miles, you will walk through a variety of landscapes. And after 50 miles, you will be somewhere that looks very different to where you were when you began. And I do like that variety and that constant change, which, it works for very long walks, that is multi-week walks. But I think it's also really good for short walks, because it means you go out for 2, 3, 4 days and you will see a lot of different landscapes. You'll experience a lot of variety. Whereas in a lot of places, I mean, you can go to the Alps and go for a walk for 3 or 4 days and the scenery will be spectacular. It won't change much in that time. You need to go out for much longer to start seeing changes.
Okay, so there was one other thing I wanted to ask about Dartmoor, and it kind of is there's someone that's got bike packing adventures has posted a comment down there. I don't know if you saw the video by Care Bear Adventures. Did you see that one?
Well, I'm afraid I couldn't make out most of that, Tony, but another question's come up, which is, can I ask your opinion on water filters? And my view of water filters, water purification in general, is yes, it's needed in some places, and I've used it in some places, but it's not needed in lots of others. I mean, in the Highlands where I live, I do not normally carry any form of water treatment at all. If I was going through lowland areas, as when I did a walk along the Scottish watershed, when I was going through the central belt, so I was taking water from streams and pools in farmlands, on the edge of towns, you know, and so on, then I treated the water. But when I'm in the hills, I don't. Obviously, you take care. I wouldn't take water from downstream of a bothy immediately downstream or a very popular camping area. But mostly, there's plenty of places to get water without having to treat it.
Okay, and then I mean I'm the same as Chris. I mean, it's because of Chris reading what Chris has done with water in the past that I never carry a water filter, and I never bother filtering the water, and I haven't died yet. So, and I don't bother filtering on Dartmoor. I've been in the peaks a few times and I haven't filtered there, and obviously when I was up in Scotland I haven't. Again, as Chris said, I think the only difference would be if I was below habitation or something like that, roads or traffic or places like that, then I would. But like I said, Dartmoor, I don't bother in Dartmoor, and there are cows and sheep and God knows what else wandering around there, but I don't.
There's a question come in, Anaris or Trailstar, and they're obviously both very, very good shelters, but given the choice, it would have to be the Trailstar. It's much lighter, it's more stable, it's easier to pitch, and I've just used it now for so many long walks and so many hundreds of nights, you know, that I have complete confidence in it, and I can put it up without really thinking about it. The only thing the Trailstar hasn't got, of course, is a door. If I was going to be regularly using campsites or camping with, you know, with lots of other people, I'd probably pick the Anaris or another tent where I had the privacy of being able to close it. But otherwise, the Trailstar.
And with the Trailstar, as we're talking about that, have you had, because you've camped in snow, haven't you, with the Trailstar?
I mean, the Trailstar is great in snow as long as it's not snowing heavily with a strong wind, because if it is, you can't keep the snow out, because obviously it can come underneath the edge, and unless you got a solid inner for it, everything's going to get covered in snow. And even with a solid inner, of course, there's no door, so snow will get in there. But the Anaris isn't suitable for snow either. I mean, it's a 3-season tent. And of course, the fly sheet is slightly raised above the ground, so you'll get snow under it. And there are mesh panels on the inner. So it's also not suitable for driving, snow driven by a strong wind. And someone's asked about, I normally use gas stoves, but I do carry a spare option. Do you use an alternative option? No, I don't. But I don't usually use a gas stove on a really long distance walk where I couldn't replace it quickly. That's when I use a meth stove because there's so little to go wrong. So it's reliable. And whilst I haven't had it for many years, I have had, failures with gas stoves, and they're virtually impossible to maintain in the field. If I was going to use a gas stove now on a long walk, because you can now get such ultralight gas stoves, I'd probably take a spare gas stove, because then it would use the same fuel. When you can get gas stoves that weigh 45, 50 grams, I don't think it'd be too much problem carrying a second one. And have I ever used Six Moons designs? Yes, when they first introduced their packs, which may be as long ago as a decade, I can't remember, but I tried one of those and it was very good. This was after the designer, Brian, who founded ULA Equipment, had gone to work for Six Moons Designs. So the pack design, if you like, was a refinement of the ones he'd done with ULA, and it worked really well. I haven't tried any of their recent packs or other gear. Oh, which tent do you believe is the best all round? It's very difficult. I mean, the Trail Star, but I know that it wouldn't be the choice of a lot of people because it's a tarp rather than a tent. And I think one tent for absolutely everything, I would probably still go back to an old favourite, which is the Hilleberg Acto, because it's relatively heavy these days, but it is strong enough to stand up to big storms, and it's ideal for solo use. Someone said, interesting why you've suddenly gone off the important topic of the camping ban on Dartmoor. Not intentional, it's just that I'm reading the questions and answering as they come in, and most of the questions are not about Dartmoor. But I agree, the camping ban on Dartmoor is clearly very important in England and Wales, I guess. For me, up here in the Highlands, there's a slight bit of deja vu listening to all the arguments, because, this year sees the 20th anniversary of the access legislation in Scotland. So we've had 20 years of being used to a right of access and a right for wild camping. And a lot of the arguments that are coming up now by the people saying, oh no, it'd be a bad idea, are the ones we heard 20 years ago and which have just about disappeared now. So I'd say, so it's strange suddenly thinking, oh, I remember that. Yep, I remember people arguing that. I remember landowners saying they'd get sued if somebody injured themselves on their land and there was free access, because, as I say, it all came up in the debate in Scotland, and here it is long gone.
So one question that I have, Chris, on the Dartmoor thing is, in America, I believe that the national parks are owned by the government, and here the national parks are owned by private individuals. Can you comment on that?
I mean, that's true. Yes. I mean, there is a hierarchy of national parks, international definitions from, I think, 1 to 5. And 1 is where it's essentially wilderness and it's owned by the government. And 5 is what the UK parks are. Because most of, as well as being privately owned, they're also full of towns, industry, farms, etc. So it's a different thing. In terms of access, government ownership of national parks does not mean, therefore, free access for everybody all the time. Far from it. In the more popular national parks in the USA, such as Yosemite, Yellowstone, Grand Canyon, all internationally famous places. But if you want to go in a lot of areas, backpacking, wild camping, you need a permit. And for the popular places or trails, the John Muir Trail, for example, in the High Sierra National Parks, people apply for permits several years in advance because they go very quickly. And this is because they have a definition that one of the things wilderness should provide is a reasonable amount of solitude. So they have it staggered with the John Muir Trust. I can't remember the figure now, but it's something like no more than 12 people can set off per day from the starting point. Now, it is true if you decide, well, you're not going to do one of the popular trails, you're going to do trails that hardly anybody else ever does, then it's very easy to get a permit, but you still need one.
All right, okay.
And in some other parks, like Glacier National Park in Montana, you don't just need a permit, but you can only camp on backcountry campsites. So when you get your permit, you have to fill it in and say where you'll be each night.
All right.
Now,
okay.
these are very basic sites. I mean, they don't have vehicle access or anything. They tend to have tent platforms and a few fire pits and a pole for hanging your bear bag from. But they are campsites.
So can you go wild camping in America as easily as you can here, forgetting the freedoms and what so say asking permissions here and all that stuff, which we ignore anyway. But
in a lot of areas, yes. I mean, wilderness areas, which are not the same as national parks, there are wilderness areas inside national parks because it's a different definition. But there's also lots of wilderness areas that are not in national parks and are just designated wilderness areas. They usually have free, again, except for very popular ones, free access. And once you go in, it's up to you.
Right.
You can walk where you like.
Right.
You can
okay.
camp where you like. But it does vary enormously from place to place. So anywhere you're going, you need to find out the local regulations, what is happening there. I mean, the only other places I know, which are, if you like Scotland, when you're talking about Scandinavia, Norway and Sweden, where the laws are very, very similar to Scotland, except they've had theirs since the early 1950s, and roughly is all man's right, which says you have a right of access to the countryside and you have a right to put up your tent wherever you want, unless there are local restrictions, of which there are very few. So obviously the national parks in Norway and Sweden, which are not necessarily all government owned, but you have completely free access to them.
Okay. And I've got another thing on Dartmoor as well, if you can just about hear me. And I don't know whether you know the answer to this or not, but Dartmoor National Park, who owns or runs, nobody owns it, but who runs Dartmoor National Park? Is it like a charity? Is it the landowners?
It's the Dartmoor National Park Authority. which is the statutory body. This is the same with all national parks. There are statutory bodies set up by the government to run the national park. So it's the Dartmoor National Park Authority that runs the park. Now, not all parks have exactly the same rules and regulations as to what the authority can do, and I'm not familiar with the detail of Dartmoor. And the National Park Authority is usually made up of government appointees, local politicians, and elected people. But again, I don't know, the detail of the composition of the Dartmoor National Park Authority. But they are government bodies, they're not charities.
Right, okay. So could the landowners of Dartmoor be part of Dartmoor National Park, and could that cause a conflict?
Yes to both. I would imagine there is local landowner representation on the park authority, on the board. I know there is, the two national parks in Scotland, the Cairngorms and Loch Lomond and the Trossachs. In both of those, there are landowners, on the park boards.
Right, okay. So let me just have a look. I put a couple of notes down. Let me just. Okay, so if a government, we won't name any particular governments, if a government wanted to legalize wild camping within the United Kingdom, one, could they do it, and could they do it easily? And two, how would they draw the lines as to where you could theoretically camp, or would they have to pass some legislation saying that you could just camp anywhere and it would be a free-for-all?
Well, I would think to do it in England and Wales, the simplest way to do it would be just to copy what Scotland has, where it's already been done. So yes, the government can pass legislation, and in Scotland, there is detailed access legislation. There's an access code, which lists all the rights and responsibilities of people taking access and of landowners. And it was a long process to get this act complete. So an awful lot of detail was gone into, and as saying, all the issues that are coming up regarding Dartmoor now were gone into, and it was, and clarified. And most places there is, as I say, free access for walking, for wild camping. The rules are supposed to be away from roads and not next to buildings, and obviously not in crops. In the same with walking, the access doesn't mean you can go and walk through a wheat field, knocking all the wheat down as you go.
Right.
Because obviously that then comes as irresponsible, you're doing damage. But you can walk around the edge of it.
Okay. Would it be just too difficult to do it in England? Because obviously one party is talking about it, but I mean, would it be possible in England and Wales, or is it just too built up and everything else to get through?
I don't see why it wouldn't be possible. Proportionately, you'd be talking about a smaller area relative to the size of the whole country than in Scotland, because obviously, Scotland has got a vast area of open land. But it would certainly be possible for all of the national parks, for coastlines, for, areas like that aren't national parks, but like the Northern Pennines. I don't see why not.
Right.
I mean, as we know, these are all places where people go wild camping anyway.
Yeah.
Even though technically they're supposed to ask the landowner. And this has been true for ages. I mean, a very, very, very long time ago, before there was any access legislation in Scotland or the limited stuff there is in England. You know, I walked from Land's End to John O'Groats. I camped virtually every night the whole way. I never had any problems, but I did the thing of, you know, I didn't camp next to someone's house. I didn't camp next to main roads, which I didn't want to do anyway. So, you know, it wasn't a problem. And in a few places where I was in lowland farmed areas, you know, I had a good look round and thought, well, I think if I nip into that woods and camp in the middle of it, no one's going to notice. So I'll do that.
Right. And with Dartmoor, given that obviously wild camping has been allowed, well, theoretically allowed since 1985, the fact that it's been accepted so long, is that now a defense that they could use in court?
I would imagine so, yes. Yeah. I mean, one of the things when I read the judgment that surprised me was the judge seemed to say that the fact that people have been camping on Dartmoor for so long did not in any way mean there was a de facto, you know, camping on Dartmoor, when it seemed to me, well, as with rights of way, when it's like, well, people have walked this for so long, there's a right of way that would apply to camping. But then, you know, we're talking about legal niceties here. So, but I just thought that, you know, that was a valid argument. Yes.
Right. Yes. There's a couple more questions on this as well. And if I think of something else on that, or if other people have got questions to ask about Dartmoor specifically, post them here and we will go through them. I think we're up. So you've answered the one about the tent from Pale Nelson. There's one, Stevie268. Can you please suggest the best lightweight tent? Did you answer that one? I'm not sure if you answered that one.
No, well, the best lightweight tent. Oh, for the Cape Wrath Trail. Well, if I was doing the Cape Wrath Trail, I'd take the Trailstar. You know, because I've taken that on so many long walks, and it would be, for me, it would be fine for the Cape Wrath Trail, depending on the time of year. If I was doing it in the summer, I'd take the mesh inner because of the midges. Outside of summer, I'd just take a ground sheet. If I was going to take a full tent, which some people might prefer to do in summer, again because of the midges, rather than have a, you know, a mesh inner for the Trailstar, I would take something like the Hilleberg Enan. I think that would be a good choice. It's a decent height for sitting up comfortably. That, of course, depends how tall you are. I mean, I'm only 5'8", so generally I can sit up comfortably in a lot of tents. And I know, because people have occasionally complained and said, yeah, it's all right for you, but I'm 6'2" and I can't sit up in that tent. I think if you want a tent you can sit up in, then something like, well, the Trailstar, depending how you pitch it, you can have a lot of headroom. But you can also go for a pyramid tent like the MLD Duomids, you know, because single pole tent in the middle, you have a lot of headroom. But I say that does depend on how tall you are.
And I guess if you're very broad shoulders, you might want maybe like the Duomid XL, then you've got a little bit more room.
Yeah, that too, yeah.
To go
and the
into.
other thing as well with being tall, because you also want enough room if you're tall to stretch out. And this is where Hilleberg tents tend to be good because they're Swedish. And Swedes tend to be tall, so their tents tend to be longer than, you know, some other tents. So they're good if you know you don't want to be pushing a sleeping bag against the wall at one end.
Right. And we may have actually answered that one, but anyway, we'll give them more information because then the next one is about going off topic, which we've sorted out. But we gave more information. There's another one which you'll have to answer that one from Domo because I won't have any idea on that one.
I don't know the detail with this, but I've looked at it and thought about it, myself, because clearly, if you're doing something like the E1 and crossing a number of different countries, 90 days and 180 days restriction is going to be limiting in countries where you're going to be asked about this. I say that because, I did a very long walk, well over 90 days, through Norway and Sweden. Norway, of course, is not in the EU. Sweden is in the EU. There were no problems whatsoever in either country, and I shouldn't think there will be now. But through the middle of Europe, down through the Alps, yes, I'm not quite sure. Hopefully, there'll be something like the USA. I mean, the long walks I've done in the USA that are longer than 3 months, you can't get a standard visitor permit for 6 months. You have to apply for a visa, which allows you to stay that long, which is just a bit of bureaucracy and paperwork, but I never had any problems getting one. Whether there's something like that through Europe, I don't know. Probably the people to find out will be any Americans or Canadians who come to the EU and do long walks.
All right, let's have a look down. So someone's saying they use the Coleman 300. Is that a tent or a stove?
I think it's a stove, but I'm not certain there. I'm not familiar with it, whatever it is.
Right.
Yeah. And the next one is one of those tiny Chinese stoves that only weighs a few grams. That's the thing about carrying, a backup stove. Ultra weave fabrics on the MLD packs sounds very good. I haven't actually seen one.
No, I haven't either.
It's so new. I only know, the specs that are online about it. And so I'm asking about the Trangia Mini 28. Yeah, I have used it. It's a neat little stove. It's essentially, the burner from the big Trangias with a little stand. It works best, I find, if you use a foil windscreen with it as well. But the burner itself, I say, is identical to all the other Trangias, and it is excellent.
And then someone was just asking if I'd seen the Care Bears Adventures video. Yes, I've seen that. I saw that video. And the only comments that I can really make on the Dartmoor thing is, I think it's a bit of a cheek, to put it mildly, that they take you to court, have this thing lifted that you can't wild camp, and then say happily try and accept money from Dartmoor National Park to allow wild camping to go on their land. That seems ridiculous to me. I mean, I don't get there's no logic to that. And then the only other thing that I read, I think it was in the Guardian, I think, but it doesn't matter. And it was quite right, because they were basically saying there that the part of the reason for doing this, or to try and put a ban, well, not a ban, but a ban, whatever we're going to call it, on camping, is that they can control it and then not have so much mess and all that type of thing. But the people who do it properly, like us, we don't leave a mess, and we do it properly and responsibly anyway. And I saw someone else, it might even have been the same chap, saying that it's about control and that type of thing. And yeah, maybe it is. Do you think it's about control, Chris?
Partly, yes. I was a bit surprised at the speed with which the National Park Authority came up with that agreement so soon after the judgment, which cynically does make me wonder whether discussions have been going on beforehand about some sort of arrangement. But obviously it's very convenient for a landowner to say, oh, you've been doing this for free, I'm going to court to stop you, now you have to pay me to let me do it, you know. But in terms of control, yes, there's always been tension between landowners wanting to control everything that goes on their land and people who just want access to it. The question with the damage and the waste, again, comes back to the Scottish access legislation. As I say, there is a code, there's a list of responsibilities, and if you break the code, you lose your right of access. So if a landowner comes on someone on their land who is, say, you know, cutting branches off trees and burning them for a fire, well, in Scotland, they could say, right, you have no right of access, you know, please go, because they've broken the code, you know, because, I mean, the Scottish Access Code defines wild camping as, you know, minimal impact, small tent, 1 or 2 nights, leave no trace. So that all of us about, you know, roadside camping, with people having, you know, parties with big tents, barbecues, loads of beer, that's not covered by the access legislation anyway.
Yeah, because I think in England, the government have brought in something about camping, but of course, I think people then confuse it with wild camping, but it's got nothing to do with wild camping. I think it is a roadside camping legislation they've brought in that give police the powers to move people on. But I think that's again to do with the roadside, not people that walk into the middle of nowhere.
Or if not necessarily directly roadside, it involves vehicles.
Right, okay.
You know, I read up a bit about this because it had come in with Dartmoor, and as far as I could see, you know, if you drive your Land Rover into somebody's field and pitch a tent, then you can be taken to court. If you walk into that field and pitch a tent, you can be asked to leave. You know, that's the difference.
Right.
So it's using a vehicle.
Okay, and that actually reminds me of something else I wanted to ask as well. So let's say we're pitched up somewhere, because it's never happened to me. I you know, no one's ever moved me on so far, touch wood. But let's say you're pitched up and someone comes along and asks you to move. Do you have to move immediately? What would happen if you refused? And could you say, look, it's coming up to 6 o'clock. It'll be dark in a minute. It's not really safe to move now. I'll stay and I'll move in the morning.
I mean, you can try any of those, but technically, if you're asked to move, you should move. But at the same time, if you say you don't, you're not going to move until the morning. The landowner then has to go off and get a court order to ask you to move, by which time you've moved anyway.
Right.
No, it's not going to happen. But
and could they get the police to come in and move you on?
No.
No.
Not unless you're doing some damage. It's not a criminal offence. It's a civil offence under the trespass laws. Of course, again, going back to the one I said before, if you're chopping down the landowner's trees and burning them on a fire, then they could say, well, we're calling the police because that's damage to property. But then the offence would not be wild camping. It would be damaging property.
Right. Yeah.
You know,
And I think that's what, and that is what was happening on Dartmoor. You know, before this, people were obviously camping and making fires and cutting things down and things like that. And I wonder whether that's some other excuse of why they're, bringing this in as well, that control thing.
I mean, that was used in Scotland 20 years ago by the landowners as to why they didn't want wild camping, because that was happening in Scotland obviously over 20 years ago. It's got worse the last few years, I think, because of COVID and the lockdown and people not going abroad, and suddenly, so there's been a lot more problems with roadside camping, but it hasn't affected wild camping as such, because it is a different activity. It's unfortunate that the media quite often doesn't understand this and calls it wild camping, which is everything. I mean, I've seen, there's been problems in some places with camper vans, and I've seen that described as wild camping. Now, obviously, sleeping in a lay-by in a camper van is a long way from wild camping in the middle of Dartmoor, or, but the term does get misused a lot.
Right. Okay, let's have a look. So Tweedy Outdoors, some parts of Australia also the same. At least officially a number of the national parks don't allow national camping, but it's a massive country with a relatively small population. But the biggest danger in Australia is when you're camping, you get bitten by a snake or something like that. And then the next one, I think someone else did ask this earlier on. Oh no, it's down here, poop deck. Yeah, so there's two questions about the Durston. So yes, fingers crossed I'm camping with a friend next week and he's bringing his Durston, and then I will take because I put a little poll thing up, and the Duomid seems to be the one that most people want to compare the Duomid to the Durston. So yes, hopefully I will do that next week. Have you seen, so one other question before we go any further. Most tents are either Cuban or, well, most of them are still nylon, aren't they? Still nylon or Cuban, but the Durston seems to be a polyester or a poly seal nylon or something. Do you know anything about that? And can you comment on that? And is it good, bad? What's the advantage or whatever?
I mean, I've never seen one of the Durston tents, so I'll be interested in how you find it compared with the Duomid. Polyester silicone seems to be used a bit more now. The advantages of polyester over nylon is it doesn't stretch.
All right.
So you don't get that sag when it's wet, that you can get with sil nylon. The disadvantage, and I don't know if this has been overcome or not, if so, I haven't heard anything about it, is weight for weight, polyester isn't as strong as nylon. So fabrics tend to be heavier. I've seen a few silicone polyester tents, but they're in the mid-range, not the top end, because polyester costs less than nylon, and also they're a bit heavier. But whether there's a new version of, polyester silicone treated that is as strong as the nylon for the same weight, I don't know.
Right. So that would be interesting to see. So yeah, so I'll have a look at that next week and do a video on that, obviously. So let's go down. Where are we next then? I've been working on a Wikipedia wild camping. It's interesting how much it varies from one country to the next. That was Tweedy at 856.
Well, down here at 911, it's got Gareth White. I have a backup stove, but it's a wood burner. I found it leaves burn marks on the ground when there's no stone around me. A thick piece of foil is an answer to that. ideally, yeah, you put it on a stone, and ideally you put it where there isn't any vegetation. And then, do any countries demand proof of vaccination before allowing visitors? Yes. I don't know how many. The only one I've been to where you had to have vaccination was Nepal. If you go trekking in Nepal, there is a series of vaccinations that are required. And then Pertex fiber pile, e.g. Buffalo Montane. It's very good. It works really well. Because I tend to run hot, I find that in terms of warmth, it works too well for me. Conditions have to be really severe before I can wear it all day without overheating. But it does work well. The only items in Pertex pile that I use regularly are the Buffalo mitts, which are very light and which I carry only in winter in case my hands get really cold, and then you can just pull them on. Your hands warm up fairly quickly. I don't usually wear those all day though, because they're so warm. And the advantage, of course, with Pertex pile compared with any waterproof fabrics and so on, a bit like Paramo, is there's no membrane or coating to break down or wear off. So it really does, it lasts incredibly well.
So how does Buffalo compare to Paramo, and do you have to waterproof Buffalo or treat Buffalo in the same as Paramo?
No, you don't have to. You can. It is much, much warmer because the lining on a Paramo waterproof is very thin.
Yeah.
The lining on a Buffalo Pertex pile shirt is a thick fiber pile. So it's, they're much, much warmer. Which is why, as I say, I tend to find them, a bit too hot.
But are they? Is it waterproof then, the Buffalo?
No.
Right.
But it's not fully waterproof, but it's warm when wet. I've been out in torrential rain and when I was trying it, and got soaked in Buffalo. And as long as you keep moving, you stay warm.
Right. Okay. Then what? And what would happen if you stopped? What would happen if you stopped and you camped and then you got going the next day? Would it be soaked and you just have to put up with it?
Yeah, but as soon as you got going, it would be. I mean, you say soaked in that you will get wet through it eventually if the rain's heavy enough, because it's totally synthetic. It doesn't absorb. I mean, it's not sodden. It's not like cotton. It's not. It's wet, but it hasn't soaked up a lot of moisture. So if it's dry the next day and you put it on and head off, it'll be dry again pretty quickly.
Right.
And of course, one of the things Buffalo recommends you wear it next to the skin for it to be as effective as possible. And it does work like that, but obviously, again, there are limitations. You've either got it on or you haven't.
I mean, I've seen the Buffalo and I've seen people talking about it, and I sort of thought about it, but I've never done any more than thought about it. I think I'd probably get too hot or too cold in it, or not too cold necessarily, but too hot, and then you haven't got anything underneath or something. So,
well, oddly enough, I saw someone and I heard a conversation between him and his companions yesterday up on the Cairngorm Plateau, where I had stopped, in the shelter of a cairn for a quick drink, and it was a cold, wet day. It was that sort of sleet and fog. It was very, very foggy, damp fog that freezes on you. So you end up, with looks like you've been snowed on heavily when it isn't actually snowing as such. Icy rain and sleet. And this party who'd been, they said, practicing navigation, you know, with an instructor came up. One of them was wearing a buffalo shirt, and the others were all in, you know, conventional Gore-Tex style, heavy-duty waterproofs, zipped up, hoods up, and they stood there briefly discussing what would do next and have a snack. And one of them said to him, "Are you really okay just wearing that still?" And he smiled and said, "Yeah, I'm fine." And I suspect he was probably drier than the others,
Right.
because they were encased in however many layers they got underneath the Gore-Tex and whatever. There was probably a lot of condensation, whereas, you know, buffalo is very breathable.
Right.
Because
Okay.
essentially it's a wind shirt over a fibre pile jacket, but the two are sewn together.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I must try one sometime, I think, because they talk about them quite a lot.
Well, they've been around now since the 1980s.
Right. Okay.
They obviously, you know, they have a, if you like, a devoted follower.
Right.
They've never been, you know, a huge name, but clearly they're successful enough to still be going.
Yeah. I'm sure that Band or No Band know when to find me on Dartmoor. I was right. People, vehicles, come on. So yeah, so Nick B, that's basically what we were saying earlier on, that that thing is a criminal offence if you're in a vehicle, but that's different to camping.
Have you ever used spam when camping? No.
Chris definitely wouldn't have done. Chris is vegetarian, so Chris definitely not. And then, damn man, it's a criminal offence if you're damaging property, blocking access, or disturbing livestock, which is
yeah. Would you guys refuse to move on if asked at night or in bad weather? I suppose it would depend who was asking and where I was. I've only been asked once, which was in Scotland before the access legislation, when I was a long way from anywhere, but there was a, you know, Land Rover track not far away, and a vehicle came along, and the bloke came over, asked me what I was doing and would I move, and I said, well, I'm going to be off in the morning anyway. And he basically said, well, see that you are, but okay.
Right.
And as I, you know, I was going to be off the next morning anyway, so it wasn't a problem. But he didn't insist that I moved at the time. If he had, you know, and I thought it's not worth the argument, and he's going to come back and check, see if I'm here, you know, I'd have just moved up the hill a little way, where I felt I was out of range of Land Rover lights.
Right. So yeah, I think it would just be, like I said, it's never happened to me, so it's difficult to answer that question. But I mean, I would just say, look, can I just stay until the morning, and then disappear in the morning? And as you, Chris said, you know, go walk somewhere else and find somewhere else half an hour away, where you're less likely to be, you know, discovered, hopefully, and fingers crossed.
And there's some more comments on the X-Mid, but then, which alcohol stove? Well, you know, the Trail Designs Titri, because it's so light. I've used that on a number of long distance walks. For car camping overnight trips, the Trangia is fine, but when weight matters, I'd always go for the Trail Designs. Right.
Yeah. I mean, I've got the Sidewinder, but I have ordered. I don't think you know this, Chris, but I have ordered the X-Boil. Have you heard of the X-Boil? It's a German stove.
No, I don't know that.
So there's a couple of videos on there. So when that comes, I'll send a picture. But basically, it's just a piece of titanium with a stove in the bottom, and then you just put a 550 ml TOAC pot, or a 650, or apparently a 750 pot in it, but you can also put a frying pan on the top of it. So I'm kind of, so I have ordered that.
It's like the trail designs then.
It's the same. It's the same idea. It's the same idea, but maybe a tiny bit. I think it's a tiny bit smaller, and I think you might be able to put a like I say, a frying pan on the top. But I don't think it's. I haven't used it. I haven't even seen one yet. But like I said, it's on its way. But it might not be as efficient because the trail designs, the pot actually sits on the rim of the cone, whereas I think with the X-Boil it kind of drops inside and then it sits, and then it sort of sits on something just inside. So I think there's a tiny gap all the way around the top, so it might not be quite as efficient.
I'll have a look and see what it looks like. Yeah. And then we get, are you interested in DIY?
No, I've never tried it.
Theoretically, but no.
Right.
You know.
And I think there was one up. Go on, sorry, carry on, Chris.
Well, I was just going to say, you know, I mean, my minimal skills, I can stitch something back together crudely if necessary, and that's about it. But I certainly couldn't make, you know, gear.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't be any good. There was one just up, Danman 922. I've had the X-Mid 1-person and 2-person.
Yeah.
The 2-person has such a huge footprint that I could never find anywhere big and flat enough to pitch it in the UK. The 1-person is still in the cupboard. Much prefer other tents. So, Danman, if you're still there, what other tents do you prefer out of curiosity? And what thoughts do you have on that, Chris?
My thoughts with that would be, does the X-Mid require a flat area to pitch? I mean, as I say, I've never seen one, so I don't know, but I'm just thinking, you know, the Trail Star has a huge footprint, but it doesn't matter if there isn't space for it. I mean, I've pitched the Trail Star with one side halfway up a bank. I've pitched it over logs, over bushes, you know, as long as there's enough room inside for you to lie down and sleep, then you can still put it up.
Yes.
So
yeah,
even though it's a big footprint, it's not, you know, it's not actually a problem. And then there's, first time purchase, someone new, down jacket or synthetic jacket? Synthetic. It's lovely having a down jacket, but in terms of use in any circumstances at all, synthetic. And again, I'll give you an example. Yesterday, when I was going up in the Cairngorms, because the forecast suggested, you know, it might be damp. So I took a synthetic insulated jacket with me. And when I had this stop by this cairn, my shell jacket was, as I say, half frozen on the outside from all this sleet and so on. I just put the synthetic jacket on top of it, so I didn't have to take any layer off and lose any heat. And I was probably there for 10 minutes, maybe 15. When I took the synthetic jacket off, when I was moving on again, it was soaked, you know, inside and out, but it was still warm. So a down jacket, even with water resistant down, would not have kept its loft so well. Now, when it's cold and dry, you can't beat down. It is, you know, weight for weight, it is much warmer than synthetic. It packs down smaller, but it's not as versatile. So if it's a question of one or the other, I'd always go for synthetic first, you know, and then maybe later on, if you want a second warm jacket, get a down one.
Tony, did you ever end up buying anything from that convention you went to not long ago? Your last video? No, because there was nothing for sale there. It's a trade show.
It was a trade show, wasn't it?
It's a trade show, yeah. You can't buy anything there, no. But there is an expo show in Birmingham in, I think it's the middle of March. So I might try and get to that. And I'm thinking you can buy stuff there if you want to.
Oh, am I right in thinking you prefer a thinner fleece, ultralight windproof combination rather than the soft shell jacket? Yes, definitely. I think it's
I would
it's
agree.
more
Same
versatile. Basically, you can wear the windproof over just a base layer. You can wear the fleece underneath your waterproof, or if there's no wind at all, on its own. You know, you can't split a soft shell, and quite often soft shell's quite heavy as well, so the windproof fleece can be lighter weight. Ultralight windproof trousers instead of waterproof trousers for warmer, drier climates. Now, theoretically, that makes complete sense. However, I have found that I can't tear myself away from carrying ultralight waterproof trousers. If I don't have them, I sort of feel like I've forgotten something, and it, you know, and it worries me. So I always take them. I mean, when I did the Arizona Trail, which is basically going to be dry, you know, the whole time, I took ultralight waterproofs, but I did take them. And it's just, you know, I'm so used to it's automatic. You have to have waterproofs. But I think, however, if you're more capable of being sensible than me, if you're doing something like the Arizona Trail, yeah, windproof trousers, you don't, you know, instead of waterproof trousers.
I must admit, outside of winter, I mean, then I will take a kilt. I've got a waterproof kilt, so I'll just put a waterproof kilt on, and it's basically a skirt, but it's not a skirt, it's a kilt. And I got a couple of videos up on that a long time ago. It's quite a fun, you go back a very, very long time. I don't know, the cheddar days, you go back 6-7 years or something like that. And I did a video on the MLD kilt, and it's quite funny actually. But I will wear that quite happily. I mean, in fact, the last trip, when you watch me doing the time lapse of pitching the Trail Star this last trip, then I've got the kilt on then, and I wore the kilt, and that was in, you know, a couple of weeks ago in this weather, because it was like heavy rain, but it wasn't too bad, and I just thought I couldn't be bothered to put my waterproof trousers on. So I just put the kilt on, just to keep the top part of my legs dry and my backside dry. And I didn't really care about the bottom part of the legs, because I was going to be in camp within an hour or so. And it was cold, but it wasn't freezing cold. And I thought, well, if I just do that, then when I'm in camp, take my trousers off. I don't keep my trousers on in camp. You know, I take my trousers off, get in the sleeping bag. Because a lot of people, I think, when they get into camp, they sort of stay outside the tent, or if they're with others, they like chat. But I don't bother doing that. When I get into camp, I get straight into the sleeping bag. So, you know, if I'm wet, it doesn't really matter. Pitch, get in the sleeping bag, and then you warm up. So, you know, I will wear a kilt, you know, where possible, and it's just more comfortable as well, and it's lighter, and it's just easier. So Jim Dady is a Van Gogh F10 helium. What pegs do you recommend over original ones? I did that one with you, Chris. Probably just Eastern. Yeah. As soon as I said that, I was thinking, well, yeah, it's Eastern pegs or something.
Whatever the tent is, the Eastern pegs, the long Eastern pegs. That's what I use with the Trail Star, and I've used with a number of other tents. They're excellent. They're very strong. They're quite light. So
the only other one that I will use sometimes, and I think is probably similar, probably as good as the was it the MSR Groundhog?
Yeah,
Groundhog?
yes.
Then
I mean, there's a number of good tents around. Hilleberg makes some good pegs as well for tents, but the Eastern ones, you know, I like. And
I'll definitely use the Eastern on the Trail Star. If you're pitching a Trail Star, or you're pitching a mid, you know, like a dual mid or something like that, then you really do need an Eastern, because all of the pressure you know, one peg is pulling against the other
Yeah.
peg.
Oh yes.
So you
yes.
really do need, yeah, you really do need like Easterns on that. And another thing, Chris, I've noticed on quite a few, well, I didn't watch that many YouTube videos on the outdoors, but quite a few people, and I think I mentioned this to you before, and I don't know if you'd seen them, but quite a few people use those yellow L-shaped plastic pegs. They're really big. I've never ever used those. Why are people using them, and are they any good? And you, I mean, I've never used them.
I've never used them either. I mean, with any pegs, if you find ones you like and you're happy with them, fine. But they look too big and clunky to me. You know, I mean, you've got to carry them, and they you know, that shape doesn't look convenient.
No, it doesn't, does it?
But
each their own. Not knocking anyone that uses them. I just never used them, and they just look. I mean, I bought some about 10 years ago, thinking all people are using them, and I bought them. I thought, what the hell am I going to carry that out there? What the hell am I going to do with that? It's not that.
Oh, the next question, Lewis Hogman. That's interesting. Do you guys think there is an opening in the UK for a new homegrown ultralight tent tarp company? Yes, I would think there is. I mean, there are, as we know, a number of small homegrown companies making packs and other things. I'd have thought.
So they just still have to make something. I mean, there are some up, but there was one up north. I mean, obviously there was Ootworks, but he did inners and not the outers, and that was going back a while. But I think there was someone else up there who made tents as well, or lightweight tents.
There was very briefly Colin Ibbotson making, which he made himself, his specialist tents.
Yeah. Does he still make anything now, or has he given up on that? You know?
Not I'm aware of, no.
So we've got the Welsh Assembly, followed the Scotlands with the right to row. Yeah, so that Dan man, I mean, theoretically, could Wales by themselves do a Scotland thing without asking England?
I think the Welsh Assembly could, yes.
Right.
And then,
so someone's saying, looking forward to seeing my thoughts on the X-Boil. And I don't know who, obviously when I get that, I'll send you a picture of it, Chris, and I'll do a video on that. So I'm kind of interested on that too.
And then we've got one for you, Tony, mainly the Z-Packs Duplex or Tarp Tent Pro Trail Lee.
I don't know anything about Z-Packs because I've never used the Z-Packs. I mean, the only thing that I remember from Z-Packs really was going back, 8-10 years when Chad, Stick Poindexter used to do videos, and then he was always getting the Z-Packs shelters and I was always getting the MLD shelters, and there was like a friendly banter between us. So I don't know anything about Z-Packs, to be honest. And Tarp Tent, I don't know. The Pro Trail is, I assume that's a tent, is it? But I don't know. I can't answer that.
Oh, and sleeping bags, down synthetic. No, in the case of sleeping bags, I would go down. Because it's much easier to keep a sleeping bag dry. If you carry it, in a waterproof dry bag in the rucksack, and you only get it out when you're inside your shelter, then it should be fine. And for the same warmth, even more than with jackets, synthetic sleeping bags are really heavy and bulky. To be honest, the only reason I can think of for getting a synthetic sleeping bag is cost, because they do cost a lot less. But other than that, I'd go for down. Every long walk I've done, I've used a down sleeping bag.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I mean, I've got the MLD Spirit Quilt 28, and I'm a big MLD fan, obviously, but I must admit, even that doesn't pack down that small You know, I mean, it's a 28, so I mean that's like -5, but it takes up quite a bit of room, and I wouldn't take it down to that. You know, if I was using that, I would only go down to like 4 degrees, 5 degrees, or something like that. I'd be using my down bag.
And then sleeping pads, I find I need more comfort the older I get. I mean, I started using the original self-inflating thermarests in the early 1980s, and I still remember now how much more comfortable they were than a carry mat. And those sleeping mats are still pretty good. Of course, much more recently, we've got, you know, the Neo air beds, and the air beds are incredibly comfortable, and also, in my experience, not very reliable. I've had 5 of them from different companies fail over the years, you know, which is very poor. So, but they are comfortable. So now in cold weather, if the ground's going to be cold, I carry a closed cell foam pad and an airbed, because then if the airbed gets a puncture, I've still got the foam pad to keep me warm and to sleep on. Summer, I'll risk just taking the airbed on the basis that, well, the ground's not that cold and I'll manage if it goes down. But certainly for comfort, the airbeds, you know, the Neo Air from Thermarest, the Exped ones, Sea to Summit ones are all very good and very comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, when I use the X-Therm mainly, and so far, touch wood, they've mostly been okay. I've found that one X-Therm I think it started going down, but I've had it a long time. So luckily, the airbeds that I've used, you know, have been, you know, mostly okay. But like I said, I've got an X-Therm that's going down, and then and then that yellow one, the Thermarest, the yellow one. What's that one called? The Z-Lite, or no, it's something else, isn't it?
The X-Lite.
X-Lite. Yeah, I've got one of those that's starting to go down. But again, I've had it quite a while. But yeah, it's just one of those things you've got to put up with, I think, really. You know, they're going to do well. They're light, you know, they're comfortable, but they're not going to last. They're not going to last forever. It's just a shame they're so expensive. And there's another one about technology.
I've just seen that. Do you keep it down to bare minimum smoke signals, etc.? No. I mean, I suppose the main technology I take with me is a smartphone, because that does nearly everything these days. I mean, mostly it gets used for navigation and as a camera. But I also, for quite a while now, you know, I've had a satellite communicator, originally Spot and currently an InReach. This is mostly because as they exist, I can let my partner know regularly that I'm okay, which, you know, stops her from worrying. So that's the main reason for taking that. I mean, obviously, for many years, I did long walks when there wasn't any way of letting people know. For, you know, the first long walks I did in the USA, my main communication, it wasn't quite smoke signals, it was postcards. But, when I got somewhere where you could send a postcard, I sent a postcard. Or postcards to friends and family. And 10 days later, they get those postcards and knew where I was 10 days before.
10 days ago.
But they wouldn't know where I was at the time. But obviously, once technology exists, it's a different matter.
I'm the same. I mean, I've just got the phone. I just use the phone, and I've got that GPS thing as well that you mentioned, and that's it. And power packs.
The main thing is the smartphone, and of course, you know, my actual camera is much more technical than when it used to be an old film camera, because that's a digital device as well. So I suppose, you know, the technology is it camera, phone, satellite communicator,
And the next one's interesting about a bivy bag, because of course I can answer that one to a degree, but then I'll let Chris kind of take over. I mean, the only, well, I tried a Rab bivy bag once. I ordered one and I had it sent, obviously here home, but it just had the entrance at the very top, and you literally just undid the hood. And I thought, how the hell are you going to get into that? That just seems absolutely ridiculous. So I sent it back, and then I saw that MOD did a proper bivy bag. So I ordered the MOD bivy bag, and that does have a zip and that zip goes down like 3/4 the length of the bivy bag, and it's got an event top. So if you want a bivy bag, I think the general consensus is amongst those in the know is that the MOD Soul event bivy bag probably is the best bivy bag that you can get. There's probably not anything that's better. There might be other things that may be equal, but I don't think there's anything better. And that's just not me. I just get that general impression from other people talking about them, because you either have an entrance to get in the top, and that's awkward. You're going to crawl in and out, or they're not very breathable. Or just various other, things like that. But the MOD Soul Event bivy bag does seem to be the one to go for, and I've used that in several videos. Sometimes covered over with a tarp over the head, a few times open, not in the rain, admittedly. But yeah, I mean, I've used that quite a few times, and it's, I have to say, it's very, very comfortable, and it's surprisingly spacious inside. So search on my video, and I've got quite a few videos, just me in that tarp doing, not tarp, sorry, in that bivvy, inside it. There's a few silly, funny ones as well. Well, all my videos are silly, funny ones. But yeah, there's a few in that, and it's, yeah, that's a good one. I'll let Chris say a couple of words on that. I just wanted to say a couple of words on that.
You obviously use a bivvy far more than I do. Overall, I've never liked bivvy bags, so I very rarely use one. One of them, which is an old Terra Nova one, Terra Nova Moonlight, I think, that comes around with me as an emergency shelter, and that is a simple sleeve. You have to slide yourself into it. There's no zips or anything else, but obviously that keeps the weight right down. But I haven't actually used it for several years.
Right, and then the next one is kind of interesting. Do you still use any garments by Rohan? Well, this shirt is a Rohan shirt from about 10 or 15 years ago. So shirts, yes.
I haven't got any of the old garments, going back to the 1980s and so on, that are in usable condition. But I have used some of their much more recent ones. Last year I had a waterproof jacket, which was perfectly fine, and an insulated jacket, synthetic insulation, which was okay, which I tested for the great outdoors. Neither of them would be a first choice item for me, but as I say, there's nothing wrong with them. Not particularly innovative or revolutionary in the way that Rohan was, when it began, but they still make perfectly good functional gear.
And then there's several people then saying about how rubbish those yellow Delta pegs are. So we've got a little bit of agreement going on there.
Well, the one, a bit hard to fit a 6 set in a hiking bag, though. I mean, that's the point. That's what I thought the option was. Well, I wouldn't want to carry them.
It would take up so much room, wouldn't it?
You should do a collab on dehydrated meals.
Yes. That's something to think about. Food.
Yeah. I was going to say, whilst I very, very occasionally buy, a specialist backpacking meal from an outdoor shop, generally, however, my food comes from the supermarket, and it's fairly basic, pastoral noodles and sauce and cup of soups and things like that. Thoughts on a poncho as a shelter and rain gear? Some places people use them in the States, but mostly where you're talking about forest walking, so there's, you know, you're not going to get strong winds.
I've used them a couple of times, but
like
not very often. I've used them a couple of times, but I've never used the poncho as a rain cover because I haven't needed to, thankfully, and then as a shelter. I mean, I've used the poncho as a shelter, and in fact, again, I've got another video. I think if you go back about 2 or 3 years, I've got the Cuban fiber MLD poncho, and I think I went camping down on Dartmoor. And I had I think I was down there for 3 nights, and the first 2 nights I was in the super mid or something like that, and then I just wanted to try the poncho for the 3rd night, and the forecast said that the weather was going to be clear that night. So I put the super mid away, because I thought, well, then when I get going the next morning, most of my stuff's put away, and I sort of I pitched the poncho, and it just hammered it down with rain, and I ended up having to use the kilt as a little bit of a sort of a door at the, not really a door as such, but at one end, just to give me a little bit of a bit of protection. But it kept me dry, and I did have the MLD super light bivvy, but I didn't get wet. You know, it was primitive, but it worked. It was interesting. Like I said, you can find that video up on there somewhere that I did, but it kept me dry, and that was just a poncho, and it hammered it down with rain. It was not a very nice bit of weather, that. Yeah. And I thought, oh, trust you, Tony, to go and put everyone away.
SBP burners.
I've got the 30 SB. Is that like JetBoil or BRS? Well, the BRS is that teeny weeny little burner, isn't it? Like a jet, not a JetBoil, the pocket rocket. I think the BRS is like a pocket rocket, but a smaller, lighter version, but probably not as maybe reliable. But yeah, I mean, I've used the BRS a couple of times, and mine's worked okay. But I tend to use MEFs just nearly all the time. The main reason why now I tend to use other things occasionally is just to get a bit more attention from other people. Because, I mean, the trouble is I've done it so long now, and I've kind of dialed in exactly what I need and what works exactly for me. And then I think there's people, apart from the real regulars, they probably just get bored and then they bugger off and watch someone else doing YouTube who's using something else. So I could just use the Trailstar, a pack, a PhD bag, and that would suit me. But then, and just cook, something cheap and simple in a pot. But like I said, people just get bored with that. That's the problem. So that's why I sometimes just use a tent, and I've done a fry up occasionally and that type of thing, because people enjoy watching that. So, and it is more enjoyable for me. It's something different as well. But yeah.
And so synthetic jacket, then down bags. Yes. Yeah. I would say so with that. Someone has answered the question as to who is MLD.
And I think Quinton Thomas, I think he was having a joke there as well. I'm sure Quinton knows exactly who it is.
Much hiking in the Beacons, Elan Valley or Snowdonia, Cambrian Way, etc. Well, I've done, not recently in the past, a fair bit in Snowdonia, but not the other areas.
I'm hoping to do something in the Brecon Beacons in a few weeks' time, because someone else posted something on Facebook, did anyone want to go camping with them? And I'm trying to be a little bit less. I must admit, I do prefer camping by myself mostly, but I'm trying to be a little bit less antisocial sometimes. So, I have done a few joint camps, but typical, not with YouTubers to get my name spread out a bit more. It's with people who don't do YouTube at the moment, which is typical of me. But anyway, so I've got something hopefully coming up in the Brecon Beacons in a few weeks' time. So that should be something a little bit different. It only uses smoke signals. Have you ever heard of hookah packs? Also, I use that's.
What's your view on sit pads? Well, I carry one virtually on day walks. I carry a sit pad year round. It's just convenient. Backpacking trips, say if it's a long trip or it's in cold weather, I've got a close cell foam mat, which makes a good sit pad anyway. But overall, yeah, I like them. I think that, you know, they're very useful.
I mean, I always just take a foam mat with me anyway, even in the summer.
Yeah.
And then when I just put it under the airbed when I'm not using it, and then if I'm walking, then I'll just take it out and then just use it for sitting on that Z light or something like that. I'll tend to use.
I mean, this question from Inspector Norse. Yeah, I've heard of those packs. I've never actually seen one though. So, you know, my knowledge of them is only what's online, and obviously, yes, they look fine, but I've never actually seen one.
Well, the one bit there that I can answer, he's asking us about MLD backpacks. Again, if you check on my channel, I'd say 90 to 95% of the time when I'm walking, I've got an MLD backpack on, you know, and the frameless one. So again, if you have a nose on my channel, and just post a comment or send me an email in the about if you're interested or you want advice or, you know, information on that, then I've been using the MLD backpacks since like 10 odd years or something like that, and they're just literally my go-to pack. I just find them perfect and brilliant. I can't say enough about them. So we'll carry on. Otherwise it's just MLD all the time. Damn, man, who the iPhone 13.
Yeah, I've heard of that. It sounds interesting.
I think it's the iPhone 14. I think he means the iPhone 14, not the 13. But yeah, same difference.
And presumably, if iPhone are doing it, then Android will do it as well. But then it becomes a question of reliability with the connection. Because the thing with two devices, the InReach can work with a smartphone, which if you want to send emails or more than a text sort of saying I am okay, is very convenient. But the InReach is also a standalone device. You don't have to pair it with a smartphone. But I'll be very interested to see the reviews of it and the way it develops with other phones. Because one of the things with the InReach, as it was and still is with the Spot, is because they're designed for outdoor use, they're waterproof, shockproof, dustproof. You know, they're incredibly tough. You're not easily going to break one unless you start hitting it, you know, with your ice axe or something. And that reliability for an emergency device is obviously really important. I mean, if I'm out in the hills and my smartphone breaks, it's not a disaster because it's not an absolute essential item. And if there was a problem, I have still got the InReach. I could still, you know, call for help. If it's one thing, I would want it to have the durability of the InReach. I mean, as it is, I prefer rugged smartphones anyway because they're tougher for outdoor use.
And the battery, of course, will last a lot longer on the InReach than your phone. Your phone will last like a day or two, if that, and the InReach will last a week, 2 weeks, whatever.
Yeah, oh yeah, much longer. Especially, you know, if you don't use the InReach much. I mean, sometimes I've used it once a day, basically send a message home saying, okay, that's it. You know, then I switch it off. It doesn't need to be on. I mean, yes, you can use it for recording routes and all sorts of things, and you'll use the battery up a bit quicker if you do that.
So then you're someone saying that they remember about postcards, and then Quinton Thomas.
Yes,
This is an interesting one. Has anyone asked what your favorite bit of kit is? Oh, how do I answer that one? Well, MLD Trail Star.
Yeah, I mean, I've been asked lots of times. I mean, yeah, if it's a tent, I'd say Trail Star. Other things, Pacer poles.
Yes, yeah, I agree. Pacer poles would be my favorite too, and probably nobody has ever heard of them. Most likely, when a lot of the YouTubers that I see, they don't use Pacer poles. I don't think they've ever heard of them, probably. But yeah, Pacer poles.
Well, again, it's a tiny company, and obviously they don't sell through shops.
Yeah,
so you'll never see them in stores.
My PhD sleeping bags, I must admit, you can't beat. The MLD packs you can't beat for me. I'm interested to try other packs, but I haven't found a pack that's better yet than the MLD packs. And obviously the Xtherm, I think for sleeping mat, the Xtherm takes some beating. Even if there is a risk of a puncture, I think warmth and weight, and I think the Xtherm is probably my favorite. So those are probably, and then the Trail Designs Caldera Comb Sidewinder thing. So those are my favorite things. And they're probably all Chris's favorite things as well, give or take a bit, apart from the pack, maybe.
Caldera Design. Yeah, packs, I'd probably come up with 4 or 5 rather than 1. But would you ever consider hot tenting? Or would you rather stay lightweight and hike in further with the top? Oh, stay lightweight and walk. I would consider hot tenting if I was going to do a fair amount of car camping in winter. But for what I do, no, stay lightweight and hike in further. And then, branded dehydrated meals are expensive. Yes, they are. Cheaper alternatives, well, as I said, Bachelor's pasta and sauce or other makes are available. Instant noodles, instant mashed potato. Idahoan is my favorite brand there. All of which, you can buy half a dozen of these for the cost of one branded dehydrated meal. So that's mostly what I eat in the hills.
There's one question just above Chris at 9:56. Pally Nelson, do you prefer walking alone or with friends, wife, etc.?
Overall, alone. Most of my walking, is done alone, but sometimes I go walking with friends, as Tony knows, and I do enjoy that. But overall, alone.
Yeah, I would say the same as well. Like I said, everything I've done has been alone, apart from the few that I do for you, Chris, a long time ago, and it's only recently that I'm trying to do some more walking with other people occasionally.
Power banks. I use one which is a hand warmer. Your view? I didn't know such things existed. So,
no. But I just use the Anker power packs, and I tend to take 2 or 3 of them, depending on how long.
As long as you don't use up too much of the power, so that when you need it for your phone, it's not dead, I don't see a problem.
Yeah.
Would you choose the MLD Grace Solo over the
Duo? That's
they're not ones I've used, so
I've used them both. It depends where you're going and what the weather's going to be like. If you're going to be in a exposed location, I would take the Duo, and if you're going to be and obviously if you've got a more sheltered spot, then the Solo would be okay. Again, I've got videos up on me using both of those. So, again, have a nose if you haven't already. I would go with the Duo mainly, but the Grey Solo is surprisingly. I mean, I used the Grey Solo on Dartmoor for 3 nights in 3 different places. it didn't actually rain, but it was quite windy, and it gave me quite a surprising amount of protection. I'll go duo, but the solo is worth looking at as well.
Is this one of those Garmin things? Yes, it is. Yeah, we should have said it. It's the Garmin InReach Mini specifically. Chris, what long trails have you done? Ooh, how long
have you got? we'll maybe do a live stream dedicated to that.
Land's End John O'Groats, Pacific Crest Trail, Continental Divide Trail, the length of the Canadian Rockies, south-north through the Yukon Territory, south-north the length of Norway and Sweden, the Munros and Tops in one walk, the Arizona Trail, the Pacific Northwest Trail, the Scottish Watershed, a route I worked out myself from Yosemite Valley to Death Valley. There's probably something I've forgotten anyway. But
Did you mention
quite
Canada?
a lot?
Did you mention
the Canadian Rockies end to end?
Yeah. The second that the MLD Exodus DCF. Yeah, I mean it's just I just use that Exodus DCF just all the time, and it's the only time I won't use it is if it's not quite big enough. It's just I just love it. It's fantastic, and it's like a big sausage. You get your stuff packed into it really tight, and it's just like a big sausage. You don't need a frame or anything. I'd love it. Again, I got videos on that as well there somewhere or other. So yeah, it's just it's fantastic. I'm waiting to see a pack that's better than that. I have to admit. That's expensive gear. Yeah, it is. But it's good. It's good stuff. And I did do a video. Was it last year? Of cheaper stuff, and I probably ought to try a bit of cheaper stuff. But then you got to buy it. That's the problem.
I haven't done it recently, but in the past, at least a couple of times, for a magazine article, I've gone out with a complete selection of gear below a certain price point, to see how it performs. And one thing I would say, given that reviewing for the great outdoors does include sometimes, budget gear, as well as ludicrously expensive gear, and mostly in between the two. But budget gear now is mostly, not everything, but mostly far better quality than it was 20, 25 years ago. One of the things that's happened with manufacturing moving overseas, which has a lot of negative things, but when I was beginning in the late 70s and 1980s, the top quality gear was made in the UK in factories, and it was top quality. And this was when you got Berghaus, Carrymore, Mountain Equipment, names that are still around now. Budget gear was made in Japan, and it was cheap and nasty and badly made. There was no quality control. But then production moved, as we know, mostly to China in the 90s, including all the big names, Berghaus, etc. The factories that made the top quality gear are quite often the same factories that make the budget gear. The difference tends to be the materials. So the budget gear is heavier. The waterproof budget fabrics aren't as breathable, but they're made to a very similar specification to the high quality gear. So, budget gear is a lot better than it used to be. Well, thank you, Nick. Still got your original Backpacker's Handbook from the 90s, along with Derek Booth's from the 70s. Yeah, I've got Derek Booth's. I pinched his title. His book's called the Backpacker's Handbook, but as it was long out of print, and I wanted a similar title. I thought I could use it. Oh, and Colin Fletcher's Complete Walker. I've got every edition of that. That was, that was one of my original inspirations, was Colin Fletcher. And relating to something Tony was talking about, in his first or second edition of his Complete Walker, which is in the 1970s, he describes something he calls Colin's kilt, which is basically a waterproof kilt made out of a trash bag. So that idea actually goes back a long way.
There's one other question just up 1010, Jason. Hey, Tony, I'm in between torso sizes looking at the MOD Profit, just unsure if I should go medium or large. I would go large. I mean, because I'm 5'8", the same as Chris. But I don't know whether I've got short legs, but I seem to have a long back. So when I've measured my back, so obviously you measure your back from here to like the bottom of your spine, and it always comes out at about 21-ish, and I haven't done it in like years and years and years, so I can't remember exactly, but it always came out at about 21 inches at least, if not even 22 from memory. And I was always thinking, why is everyone else who's my size, 5'8", always having medium size packs? And I always found when I had a medium pack, it would rise up, so the strap that goes around the middle would end up, rather than being around the hips, would be around the stomach. And it just wouldn't really ever be very comfortable. This is when I had, this was before MLD days. This is like, in the 2010s and that type of thing. So I always just go large now. So if your back is 20, 21, 22 inches, then I would go large. Mine's large, and I'm 5'8", and it's a absolute perfect fit, for me.
Do you carry a backup emergency meal?
No, I don't. I just make sure I've got enough, but then I always take loads.
No, I don't know. Oh, I like that. Inspector Norse, thank you. It's outdoor and gear tool. It's better than watching Netflix.
On a Friday evening. Yeah. We have a lightweight community in Germany.
Well, it would be nice to be there, but unfortunately, I don't think I'm going to be in Germany anytime soon.
No, unfortunately.
With or without a frame? With a frame, or at least a frame sheet. I think frameless packs are fine if you're going to be carrying less than 8 kilos, probably. But if you want, which I do, if you're intending to carry most of the weight on your hips, not on your shoulders, then, a frame works for transferring the weight. So I prefer
that's probably the only one where I don't disagree with Chris, but that's the only one where I have an opposing opinion. I mean, like I said, with my MLD frameless packs, I load them up to 12 or more kilograms, and as long as it's done up really, really well, and you get that hip belt, tight around your hips and not over your stomach, and you've got a good fit on it, then like I said, I've been using the frameless packs the last 10 years. And I haven't found anything better yet. And I'm often carrying 12, 14 plus kilograms in there, because I've got to put power packs in there and just 3 odd days worth of food, and it just adds up. And I've found those packs bizarrely to be more comfortable than the Osprey pack. I mean, I had the Osprey Talon. Well, I had an Osprey Talon 44. And that I was a very old pack, and I found that very comfortable, very nice. And I bought the Talon 55, which is a new pack, and I did a video on that, and it got a few dislikes because people obviously were Osprey fanboys, and it was a pile of poop. It was awful pack. I mean, it was uncomfortable. The pockets you couldn't use. It was rubbish. I was really, really disappointed in the Talon 55. Again, I got a video on it. You disagree, post a comment. Happy to converse with it. It was awful, and it was uncomfortable. I put the same amount of stuff in an MLD frameless pack, and I just basically get the my airbag. I fold it up. You've seen me do it in a million videos. I just fold it up, put it in the back of the pack, and it's so bloody comfortable. It's ridiculous. So yeah, just uses. I'm sure Tony's middle name must be MLD.
I think one of the things there is, because, you know, I've used that MLD pack, and yeah, it is comfortable. It does work okay. But what I found was, as long as you pack it carefully.
Yeah, you got to pack it properly.
What you're effectively doing, which is what your mat is doing, is you're creating a virtual frame.
Correct.
To transfer the weight to your hips. Well, I prefer to have something where I don't have to think about that, you know, where I don't have to pack it carefully because it's already got a frame. But yes, if you're prepared to, you know, pack very carefully.
Watch my last video in the Peak District, and I'm trying to pack the stuff in together. Oh, it was so tight, it's ridiculous. But I got it packed and it was perfect.
Well, what I always think is, I mean, sometimes packing carefully isn't a problem, but particularly on long walks, I'm always thinking, I'm packing up in a storm, in the tent, in the morning, you know, it's pouring with rain, the wind is howling. I don't want to have to think about everything going in carefully and everything else. I just want to stuff things in the bag. And similarly, in Scotland in the summer, sometimes it's like the midges are out there in their hordes. I want to stuff everything in the pack, you know, get the tent down and start running to get away from them. I don't want a pack where it's only going to be comfortable if I've packed it correctly. But
then, I mean, I've been packing them for about 10 years, so I kind of got it down to a T.
Yeah, that's the other thing, of course. It's if you get, just me, carry more made in Accrington. Yep, I went to their Accrington factory a couple of times. Can any of these new super breathable light insulated jackets replace a classic fleece as a mid layer? Yes, they can. I've worn them as such. They work fine, and compared with fleece, they tend to have the advantage that, you know, they're much more wind resistant than a standard fleece, so you can wear them as an outer jacket more of the time. The only thing I'd say is they won't last as long. You know, fleece is pretty indestructible, and the insulated jackets slowly go flat. So basically the insulation slowly collapses. I mean, they're much better than they used to be. But if you want durability, then fleece. But yes, one of the very light ones, given that you can get ones now in the, you know, around 400 grams, the same weight as a mid-weight fleece, they work fine as a mid layer.
So then there's just a few thanks. And Quinton says, yeah, I've always got plenty of cheese and crackers. That is for sure. I've always got plenty of food. I'm never short of food. And Jim MLD, Jim MLD, got MLD in the brain. I'm like, Jim JC. Yeah, the Talon 44 is a good pack. They just screwed up the 55, unfortunately.
I mean, I'm not familiar with the 55, but and I'm not saying Osprey have done this, but a mistake I've come across over the years with a number of pack companies is they have a pack that does really well, and people say, but we'd like it to be bigger. So they scale it up, but they don't change the harness system at all. So a pack that, you know, is fine with, say, 35 litres in it, and the amount of weight you put in a pack and the size it is, you scale that up to 55 litres, and suddenly it's not as comfortable at all. And as I say, that does happen, which can mean that a pack which is fine in one size, you know, one capacity, and it isn't in another, even though the harness is in fact the same. Yeah, someone, just me, went up Scarfell Pike 2 weeks ago in a blizzard, dressed in Rohan and buffalo. Right. Thanks to the people who are saying, you know, they like my work and so on. First aid gear, what do you carry? A simple first aid kit in a nylon pouch, you know, some painkillers, some plasters of various sizes, you know, some wipes, you know, a small bandage. Nothing, not a great deal.
Yes, I don't take very much. I've got a video on that as well. Jim's going back some time on what I take.
Do you use waterproof bags? Yes, yeah. I think one of the best innovations of the last decade has been lightweight dry bags, because before they came along, when you got what were called stuff sacks, which were made of waterproof fabric. I mean, stuff sacks still around, but the seams weren't sealed, and anyway, they had an open top with a draw cord, so you couldn't rely on them to be waterproof. So then I always used to have a big sack liner and then stuff sacks inside it. But with waterproof dry bags, I don't bother with the sack liner, because you just put anything that's water sensitive in the dry bag. So I think these dry bags, as I say, they're one of the best innovations, in my opinion, of recent years.
Yeah, so they're very good. Unless you've got a Cuban fibers pack like the one I like using, and that's waterproof. But even then, I still put everything inside the stuff sacks and everything like that anyway, just to be on the safe side.
Waterproof packs. I mean, when I did the Scottish watershed, which turned out to be in the Highlands anyway, a very wet walk, you know, which you came on early on.
Yeah, that's right.
I used I
brought the sun with me on that one, didn't I, Chris? Because that
you did, yes.
The bit of time I was with you was the only time you had sun.
Yeah. The lightweight pack I used on that is just about waterproof. But the thing with the waterproof pack is you're still going to end up putting wet things inside it, you know. So what do you do with them then? Well, the thing with having dry bags is if I've got wet waterproofs and they're going in the pack, well, anything that's water sensitive is in a dry bag anyway, so I can just put the wet waterproofs back in the pack. The same with a wet tent. So I think, yeah, even with a waterproof rucksack, it's worth having, you know, not everything, water sensitive items, you know, down items, electronics and so on, things that you really don't want to get wet. The old Helly Hansen fiber pile. Yep. I dug mine out for a trip in December to Craig Meggie, which was for a Great Outdoors article. It's in the current issue, in which I dug out and used a lot of old gear. And I got out my old Helly Hansen double pile jacket that I took on the Pacific Crest Trail in 1982. And it's still very warm. And it was great. And this was, you know, that was before fleece came along. So it was all called fiber pile. A new pack. Oh, and the Atom Pack Mow. The Atom Pack Mow is very good.
I've heard good things. I haven't seen one, but I've heard very good things about them.
My review, I think, is on the TGO website. It's very well made, very well designed, because obviously, you know, the designer is a long distance walker and wanted something that they would use on something like the Pacific Crest Trail. So yeah, I think it's excellent, and it's an example of, which is mentioned, you know, a British cottage manufacturer making ultralight quality goods. Called Fiber Fur. It was certainly in the UK. It was sold as Fiber Pile. That was the name. Do you still take a physical book to read, or is it all tech? If it's a short one-night trip, I sometimes still take a book, but mostly I take a Kindle because then I've got a whole library.
Right. I just use my phone and watch films mainly, so I don't take a book on that one.
Mats again, closed cell foam inflatable. As I said, closed cell foam in cold weather and winter, plus an inflatable, because then if the inflatable fails, you've still got the closed cell foam. So closed cell foam for durability and reliability, and the inflatable for comfortable. As for inflatable, do you use a pump? No.
I must admit, I do use one of those little pump things now, but they're quite light. So yeah, I must admit, I do use one of those pumps now. Yes.
Luxury item. I carry a small pair of binoculars. Yeah, I mean a very small pair.
I don't really take I just take everything that I need. I suppose pillow really, but I don't know if that really counts as a luxury item. Then obviously everything else is just the stuff that I need. So.
Helly Hansen pile jacket, 80% wool. They may have made wool ones. The one I've got is 100% nylon. Go Light Jam, Go Light Galaxy. Yep, they're good packs, long gone packs.
Yeah, I've not heard of those.
But most of them were good. Yeah.
I don't take a radio. I must admit, the next one.
No, I don't take a radio. Of course, the phone has got a radio built in.
I just watch. I load the film up.
I don't use it.
Films. But... Okay, I've got one question for you, Chris. Well, it's kind of like for both of us actually. So this is a question from Ron. He posted it on the Facebook page. We obviously know who Ron is. I want to hear you two compare hiking, sleeping on the ground, body creaks and aches versus when you were both 30. So how do you find your body now, sleeping, walking, getting in and out of that trail stand, things like that? Just generally now, there's a bit of a difference between you and 30s.
Can I remember that long ago? Well, I certainly find that I like a more comfortable mat now. I was a bit surprised a few years ago when it was an anniversary of the first TGO Challenge walk in 1980. So I got out my journal from then and discovered that the only insulation I took was 3 mil closed cell foam, which I can't imagine sleeping on 3 mil closed cell foam now. I mean, the main thing, I don't really notice anything when walking. The main thing when camping, I notice is in the mornings I'm a bit stiffer than I used to be. You know, I have to sort of stretch a bit and move a bit carefully when I'm getting up. But not really a huge difference.
Yeah, mostly the same. I mean, I'm not as, I must admit, for other reasons, but anyway, I'm probably not as fit as I was. So I do find sort of fitness is a bit of an issue at the moment, and sort of some ground and terrain I'm not that brilliant on, like boulder fields and things like that. But I think that's more of a confidence thing than anything else. But and again, getting down and up is maybe not quite as easy as it was. But for Christ's sake, it's only 20 years ago. I feel like I'm 90 sometimes, and that's older than Chris is now. So.
I think your thing with the boulder fields, thinking of our Kettingham's trip in the autumn, that's just familiarity.
Exactly.
Because, as I said, because that's normal terrain for me.
Yeah.
I'm often going through terrain like that. But as you said, on Dartmoor,
Yes, there aren't any. No, so I
You
mean,
don't have terrain like
yeah,
that, and it
exactly.
is. You know, I'm sure if you were going through boulder fields like that one regularly, you would get much more used to it. I don't think it's an age thing. I think it's
a
you know,
confidence thing.
Yeah, what
Yes.
you're used to. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's just do one more question, and then we'll be
Yeah.
better get going because time's ticking on a little bit here.
It certainly is, isn't it?
Yes. Tony, have your dogs? No, they kind of just got straight into it. I mean, with Bess, when you go back, you know, to 2011 and things like that, I must admit, because Bess was older when I started in my house, which is obviously where I am now, I've got a conservatory literally that side. And I did pitch I had the Scarp 2 back then, which I still have in the videos you've seen. And I just about squeezed the Scarp 2 in the porch, and then in the conservatory, and it just about fitted. I couldn't, because there's not enough room in the garden really. And basically I just slept 1 or 2 nights with Bess in the Scarp 2 just to see how she would be and whether she would stay in position, and she was fine. So I never had any problems with her. She just settled down. And again, the same with Lassie. I mean, I took her on the early walks, and she just settled down. I kept her on the lead the first few walks, just to be on the safe side. But other than that, you know, she never goes very far. And if I'm close to the water, obviously she'll be in the water. But if I'm like 100 or 200 meters away from the water, maybe a bit more, it's difficult to tell really, but she won't go beyond a certain distance. It's like she knows that she will only go herself a certain distance from camp, you know. So if I was to pack up, you know, I'm not having to think, oh, have I got to look around for her, have I got to shout and call, where is she? She will be, I may not see her, but I know that she will be close enough, you know, that I can call her name and she will come over, because she spends most of the time outside the tent. So yeah, she settled down. She settles down fine. Is your picture still within? Yeah. Thankfully, they are still within the just about, because on the South Moor, back, I suppose if we finish with Dartmoor super quick, and then we will have to get going. The South Moor, unfortunately, they've cut off some from the south, unfortunately. But yes, the bit that I camp on the south is still just about within the designated area, the new designated area. Yes. Anyway, I think we better get going, Chris, because you've probably got things to do. I better go and get things going here. But that's been a very, very enjoyable camp.
I'm surprised.
Camp talk, I mean.
No. Yeah, it's been great. The time has flown. I'm surprised. Realizing what time it is.
We can stay there for a minute, Chris. Don't go away. I'll turn the broadcast off, so we say goodbye to them, and then I'll say goodbye to you separately in a second. So thank you very much. Thank you everyone for watching.
Yeah, thank you everybody. Thank you.
Okay, we will see you again another time, hopefully. Thank you. I'll turn the broadcast off now. See you again, all. And don't forget to like, subscribe, share, all that nonsense as well. Thanks. See you again. Oh, hang on. Press the right button.